The alien delegation arrived with a cold precision that mirrored the sterile vastness of the galactic station orbiting Earth. Their ship, an angular craft of dark metal and shimmering blue lights, seemed more a living extension of their race than a vessel. From its maw emerged the beings who called themselves the Zerathi, tall, angular figures with pale skin that refracted light like polished crystal. Their movements were deliberate, each step echoing across the polished floor as they approached the waiting human delegation. Ambassador Ilara Lynn suppressed the instinct to shift under their penetrating gazes. She had read the briefings and seen the footage, but standing before them was different. The Zerathi's featureless faces, save for faintly glowing lines where mouths and eyes might be, unnerved her. They seemed like sentient statues, every gesture laced with an almost unbearable stillness. When the tallest among them, a figure designated Tvan, spoke, the sound was smooth and mechanical, like wind flowing over metal. "Humanity," it began, "the Federation requires your expertise. Your uniqueness." Ilara's lips quirked into a faint smile. It was a backhanded compliment at best. Humanity's reputation among the stars was as unpredictable as the species itself. Some called them savages, others innovators, but none could deny their knack for survival. "We're listening," Ilara replied, keeping her tone neutral. Tvan's glowing lines pulsed faintly. "The swarm threatens the fabric of the Federation. Their numbers grow, their tactics evolve, and they adapt to our defenses faster than we can recalibrate. You are less bound by logic than our other allies, less constrained by predictable patterns. We seek your strategies, your insight." Ilara noted the way Tvan avoided saying help. It was clear the Zerathi, and likely the rest of the Federation, struggled to admit weakness. Still, her mind raced. The swarm. The name was apartment. She had seen reports of entire planets stripped of life, fleets consumed in waves of chitin and venom. No amount of technology or firepower seemed to stem the tide for long. "And what do you expect from us?" Ilara asked. Her voice was calm, but she felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. "You are a species that turns predators into allies," Tvan said. "We have observed your history with wolves. We require your methods to create new weapons." "Living ones?" Ilara blinked. For a moment, she thought she had misheard, but the Zerathi's stillness confirmed it. A low chuckle escaped her lips before she could stop herself. The sound echoed awkwardly in the sterile chamber. "You want us to domesticate a galactic solution to the swarm?" Tvan's glowing lines brightened. "If that is how you define it, your capacity to forge loyalty from instinct, to mold wild creatures into partners, is unmatched. This is why the Federation has sent us to you." Ilara's mind spun as she processed the implications. Wolves. Dogs. Humanity's oldest and most loyal companions. What the Zerathi were asking for was more than training. It was trust, symbiosis, evolution. Could such bonds even be forged with alien species? Could humanity's ancient success with wolves translate to something this vast? A soft growl at her side pulled her from her thoughts. Orion, her German shepherd, sat alert and watchful. The Federation allowed humans to bring certain animals into space for companionship, and Orion had been her shadow since she took the ambassadorial role. His sharp eyes tracked the Zerathi with unflinching intensity, a silent reminder of humanity's long history of thriving alongside predators. "Let's say we agree," Ilara said cautiously. "What exactly do you expect us to achieve? Turning wild creatures into soldiers isn't just about training. It's about trust, bonds, things that go beyond programming or conditioning. Do you really understand what you're asking?" Tvan tilted its head slightly, the motion eerily smooth. "Understanding is irrelevant. Results are essential. If you succeed, the Federation survives. If you fail, the swarm consumes us all. What more is there to consider?" Ilara frowned, but before she could respond, Orion let out a sharp bark. The sound seemed to ricochet through the chamber, startling even the unflappable Zerathi. Ilara reached down instinctively, resting a hand on his head. His ears twitched, and his body was tense, but he didn't move from her side. "You see this?" she said, her voice firm. "This is what you're asking for. Trust built over time, through shared struggle and mutual respect. You want us to teach the galaxy something it has never understood, what it means to fight not just alongside an ally, but as one." Tuan studied Orion for a long moment, its glowing lines dimming as though in contemplation. "If it can be done, you are the species to do it. But we have little time. The swarm advances even as we speak." Alara glanced at her team, scientists, trainers, and strategists, all of whom wore expressions ranging from concern to determination. She took a deep breath. The stakes were impossibly high, but humanity had always thrived when the odds were stacked against them. If their history had taught them anything, it was that survival wasn't just about strength or intelligence. It was about adaptability, connection, and the willingness to embrace the unpredictable. "Then we'd better get to work," she said. Orion barked again, as if in agreement, and for the first time, Alara thought she saw a faint flicker of understanding in Tvanes's glowing gaze. Whether it was her imagination or the start of something profound, she couldn't be sure. But one thing was certain. Humanity's oldest lesson was about to be tested in a way no one could have anticipated. As the Zerathi delegation departed, their ship vanishing into the void, Alara knelt beside Orion, scratching behind his ears. "Well, boy," she murmured, "it looks like it's up to us to teach the galaxy why we're still here." Orion wagged his tail, his amber eyes filled with a trust so complete it was almost humbling. Alara rose, her gaze hardening as she turned to her team. "Let's show them what humanity can do." And with that, the first steps toward an unimaginable future began. The sprawling training facility on Luna Base stretched across the barren, gray landscape like a fortress of determination. Beneath the reinforced domes and artificial atmospheres, humanity's latest and most audacious experiment was underway. Alara Lynn stood in the observation chamber, hands clasped behind her back as she watched the chaos unfold below. Her German shepherd, Orion, sat at her side, his ears twitching with alertness. Around them, the alien recruits were anything but synchronized. On the training floor, humans worked side by side with selected alien species, creatures chosen for their potential to forge bonds, though none of them seemed remotely interested in the concept yet. A Zilith beast, a feline-like predator with iridescent fur and razor-sharp claws, snarled at its trainer, lunging only to be yanked back by the reinforced tether. Nearby, a Surokan, a six-legged, armor-plated creature, stared blankly at the human, trying to coax it forward with gentle words and food. Alara sighed. The reports from the field were grim. The swarm was advancing faster than expected, consuming colony worlds and Federation fleets with merciless efficiency. If this project didn't succeed, there might not be enough time to develop another plan. "Commander, we're making progress," said Captain Rylan Hayes, stepping up beside her. His voice was steady, but the lines on his face betrayed his own doubts. "Slow progress, but progress nonetheless." Alara glanced at him, her dark eyes narrowing slightly. "Progress? Half the recruits don't seem to understand the concept of teamwork, let alone trust. If we can't forge bonds, we're dead in the water." Rylan followed her gaze to the chaos below. A human trainer narrowly avoided being swiped by the Zilith's claws, stumbling backward as the creature hissed. Across the room, another trainer threw up their hands in frustration as the Surokan ignored every command. "We knew this wouldn't be easy," Rylan said, his voice softening. "But humanity's strength has never been in taking the easy path." Alara was about to reply when Orion let out a low growl. Following his gaze, she spotted an Erishan trainer, a live alien with translucent skin and glowing veins, approaching one of the Ziliths. The Erishans, a Federation species known for their stoicism, had volunteered to assist, but their approach was clinical at best. The trainer extended a mechanical probe toward the Zilith, which recoiled violently, baring its fangs in a display of raw hostility. "Stop!" Alara's voice cut through the chamber like a whip. The Erishan froze, the probe inches from the Zilith's face. Alara strode down to the training floor, Orion trotting beside her. "You can't force trust with machines," she said, her tone sharp. "That's not how this works." The Erishan tilted its head, its translucent features catching the artificial light. "Force is irrelevant. The subject must adapt or be deemed unsuitable." Alara clenched her jaw, frustration flaring in her chest. "It's not about adaptation. It's about connection. Trust isn't built by treating them like tools." She turned to the human trainer who had been working with the Zilith earlier. "Step back in." The young woman hesitated but nodded, moving cautiously toward the Zilith. She crouched low, holding out a piece of meat in her hand, her movements slow and deliberate. The Zilith growled but didn't lunge, its eyes, shimmering like liquid silver, fixed on her, calculating. The trainer murmured softly. Words meant less for meaning and more for soothing. Alara held her breath as the Zilith took a hesitant step forward, then another. Finally, it snatched the meat from the trainer's hand, retreating quickly but without hostility. "That's how you start," Alara said, her voice quieter now but no less firm. "It's not about dominance. It's about trust, mutual respect." The Erishan watched in silence, its glowing veins pulsing faintly. "I see. Your methods are unconventional." "They're human," Alara replied. The days that followed were grueling. Trainers worked tirelessly, adjusting their approaches based on each species' unique behaviors and instincts. Progress was slow, and setbacks were frequent. A Varnik, a serpentine creature with striking blue scales, escaped its enclosure, slithering through the facility and causing havoc before being recaptured. A Surokin accidentally injured a trainer, its sheer size making even a playful nudge dangerous. But there were breakthroughs too. Small moments where the bonds humanity sought began to form. A Zilith allowed its trainer to touch its fur without flinching. A Surokin followed a series of basic commands, its 6 legs moving in surprising coordination. The Varnik, once so unpredictable, began to respond to voice cues, its sleek form coiling protectively around its trainer during a mock drill. Alara felt the tide beginning to shift. She spent long hours on the training floor, offering guidance where she could, watching as trust took root in ways that defied logic. Orion was a constant presence, his calm demeanor an anchor for both humans and aliens alike. One evening, as the facility's artificial lights dimmed to simulate night, Alara found herself sitting on the floor beside a young trainer named Dax. The man was covered in dirt and sweat, his face etched with exhaustion. Beside him lay a Zilith, its iridescent fur gleaming faintly in the low light. "I didn't think it would work," Dax admitted, his voice heavy. "When we started, she wouldn't even look at me without snarling. Now!" He reached out, hesitating for a moment before stroking the Zilith's neck. The creature rumbled softly, its silver eyes half closed in contentment. Alara smiled, a rare softness in her expression. "You earned it. Trust isn't given, it's built. Brick by brick." Dax nodded, his hand resting on the Zilith's shoulder. "Do you think it'll be enough? Against the swarm, Alara's gaze drifted toward the training floor, where other teams worked late into the simulated night. Humans and aliens, once strangers, now moved with a tentative but growing unity. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I know this. We're stronger together than we are alone. If we can hold on to that, we might just stand a chance." As she spoke, Orion leaned against her side, his warm presence a reminder of the bond that had brought them to this moment. Alara reached down, scratching behind his ears. The future was uncertain, the stakes impossibly high, but for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope. Somewhere in the distance, a Zilith's low growl turned into a rumbling purr, and the sound carried through the chamber like a promise. The silence before the battle was suffocating. Alara Lynn stood at the command deck of the orbital defense platform, her eyes fixed on the swirling mass of darkness approaching the Federation stronghold below. The swarm was an unrelenting tide, an endless wave of alien predators with no fear, no remorse, and no weakness humanity had yet discovered. The reports described them as living nightmares, serrated exoskeletons, soulless eyes, and jaws capable of tearing through steel. Seeing them now, blotting out the stars, Elara understood why so many had already fallen. Behind her, the war packs were assembled, a mix of human canine teams and their alien counterparts. The bond they had fought so hard to forge was about to be tested in a way none of them could have imagined. She turned to face them, her gaze sweeping over the assembled trainers and their companions. Some were human, standing with their dogs at their sides, the animals' ears perked and bodies tense with readiness. Others were alien, the Ziliths, Varniks, and Sirokans all arrayed with their human partners. They looked different, but the determination in their eyes was the same. They weren't just soldiers anymore. They were something more. "Listen up," Elara began, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "This is what we've trained for. The swarm won't stop. They won't hesitate. But we have something they don't. We have trust. We have loyalty. And we fight as one. Remember that. No matter what happens out there, you're not alone." A low growl echoed from the front of the group, and Elara saw Orion standing alert, his amber eyes fixed on her. It was as if he understood the gravity of her words, his silent presence a rallying cry for everyone in the room. She felt a swell of gratitude for him and for the bond they shared. The alarm blared, sharp and urgent, and the platform shuddered as the first impacts from the swarm's assault began. The time for speeches was over. Elara nodded once to her team, and they moved as one, streaming toward their drop pods. The descent to the surface was chaotic, the swarm's aerial units swarming like hornets around the falling pods. The human pilots weaved and banked, narrowly avoiding collisions and incoming fire. Elara's pod shook violently, the shriek of metal on metal ringing in her ears as something scraped along the exterior. Across from her, Orion sat unflinching, his gaze fixed on the door. When the pod hit the ground, the impact jarred every bone in her body. The door blew open, and the battlefield erupted into chaos. The swarm was everywhere, their screeches piercing the air as they surged forward in an unending tide. Elara drew her weapon, her heart pounding, and Orion leapt out beside her, his growl cutting through the cacophony. The war packs moved into formation, their training kicking in with precision honed through months of relentless effort. Humans called commands, their voices rising above the din, and their companions, canine, alien, or both, responded without hesitation. A Zilith lunged at a swarm soldier, its iridescent fur a blur of motion as its claws tore through chitinous armor. Nearby, a Surokan charged, its massive bulk slamming into a cluster of enemies and scattering them like leaves in a storm. Elara fought alongside her team, her movements fluid and instinctive. She fired at the swarm, her shots finding their mark, but it was Orion who amazed her most. He moved with a lethal grace, weaving through the chaos to take down enemies twice his size. But it wasn't just his ferocity that stood out. It was the way he coordinated with those around him. He worked with the Ziliths, herding enemies into their paths, and he barked commands the Sirokans seemed to understand, guiding them toward vulnerable targets. Despite their efforts, the battle was not without cost. A Varnik trainer fell, his serpentine companion howling in grief before launching itself into a suicidal charge. A Surokan collapsed under the weight of its wounds, its human partner dragging it to safety amidst a hail of fire. The losses were devastating, but the bonds forged in training held. For every fallen pack, another stepped forward to fill the gap, their determination unshaken. The turning point came when the swarm brought forth their behemoths, massive, armored creatures that dwarfed even the Sirokans. They roared as they advanced, their footsteps shaking the ground. Panic rippled through the Federation forces, their lines threatening to break. Elara knew this was the moment that would define everything. She grabbed her calm, her voice steady but fierce. "War packs, focus on the behemoths. We trained for this. Use your bonds. Trust each other. Take them down." Orion barked sharply, and Elara felt a surge of resolve. She charged toward one of the behemoths, Orion at her side and a pair of Ziliths following close behind. The behemoth turned, its jaws snapping as it roared. Alara fired at its eyes, aiming to blind it, while Orion darted beneath its legs, slashing at its unarmored joints. The Zilliths climbed its sides, their claws finding purchase in the gaps of its armor. It took everything they had, but the behemoth finally collapsed with a deafening crash. All around her, the warpacks were doing the same, their coordinated attacks overwhelming even the swarm's most fearsome weapons. The tide of battle began to shift, the swarm's advance faltering for the first time. By the time the last of the swarm retreated, the battlefield was a patchwork of victory and loss. Smoke rose from the ground, and the air was thick with the scent of ash and blood. Alara sank to her knees, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. Orion pressed against her side, his fur matted, but his eyes still sharp. She wrapped an arm around him, her breath hitching as the reality of their survival sank in. Around them, the survivors gathered, human and alien alike. They were battered and bloodied, but their eyes held a new light, one of unity, of understanding. The bonds they had forged had held, and it had saved them. Alara looked out over the field, her gaze lingering on the horizon where the swarm had fled. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time, she felt they had a chance. They had shown the galaxy what it meant to fight not as individuals, but as a pack. Together, they were stronger than any enemy. Together, they would endure.